Yesterday morning, I was banned from my own backyard by my brother's fiancée, who'd begged to use my property for her bridal shower. And by noon, I'd made one small change to my sprinkler system that sent 35 women in designer dresses screaming across my lawn, while the bride-to-be stood dripping in my flower bed questioning every decision that had led her to that moment. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 6 months watching my brother Holden transform from the laid-back guy I grew up with into a stressed-out puppet dancing to whatever tune his controlling fiancée Sloane decides to play. But yesterday, I finally stopped enabling her behavior and reminded her whose property she was trying to commandeer for her perfect princess fantasy. The whole mess started 3 months ago when Sloane called me in tears about her bridal shower crisis, explaining that the venue she'd booked had double-scheduled her date and that every other decent location in town was either booked solid or outrageously expensive for a last-minute reservation. She'd heard from Holden that I had a beautiful backyard with mature landscaping and a large patio area that would be perfect for an elegant outdoor celebration, and she wondered if I might consider letting her use my space for what she promised would be a small, intimate gathering of close friends and family. I should have trusted my gut instinct that told me this was a terrible idea, but Sloane had been on her best behavior around me for months, probably because she knew I was one of the few people in Holden's life who wasn't immediately charmed by her sweet but helpless act. She'd been trying to win me over with compliments about my house, my cooking, my landscaping skills, anything that might convince me she genuinely appreciated having me as a future sister-in-law rather than seeing me as an obstacle to her complete control over my brother's life. When she made her tearful request, Sloane emphasized how much it would mean to her to have the celebration at a place that was special to Holden's family, how touched she was that I might be willing to open my home for such an important occasion, how grateful she'd be for any help I could provide in making her dream shower become reality. She even offered to pay for any additional landscaping or decorating expenses, saying she wanted to leave my yard even more beautiful than she'd found it. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let her use my backyard for the shower, partly because I wanted to support Holden during his engagement period, and partly because I thought this might be an opportunity for Sloane and me to develop a better relationship before she officially became part of our family. I figured hosting her bridal shower at my house would give us a chance to work together on something positive, to build the kind of sister-in-law bond that could make future family gatherings more pleasant for everyone involved. But within a week of agreeing to host the shower, I started seeing the real Sloane emerge from behind the grateful future sister-in-law performance she'd been maintaining for months. She began sending me detailed lists of requirements for the event, not suggestions or requests, but demands presented as non-negotiable necessities for what she'd started calling her dream shower. She wanted specific flowers planted in my garden beds, particular lighting installed around my patio, even the color of my outdoor furniture changed to match her chosen theme of blush pink and gold elegance. When I gently suggested that some of her requests were a bit excessive for a backyard gathering, Sloane became emotional and told me that this shower was her one chance to have the perfect pre-wedding celebration she'd been dreaming about since childhood. She said that as someone who'd never been married, I probably couldn't understand how important every detail was to a bride, but that she'd hoped I'd be more supportive of making her special day as magical as possible. Over the following weeks, Sloane's involvement in planning her backyard shower grew from enthusiastic collaboration to complete takeover of my outdoor space. She hired a party planner who started treating my yard like a blank canvas for their creative vision, suggesting modifications to my landscaping, lighting, and layout that would have cost thousands of dollars and permanently altered the appearance of my property. When I expressed concerns about the scope and expense of their proposed changes, the party planner explained that Sloane had given them the impression that I was eager to invest in improvements that would benefit my property value while also creating the perfect backdrop for her celebration. Apparently, Sloane had been telling people that I was so excited about hosting her shower that I'd insisted on upgrading my entire outdoor space for the occasion. 2 weeks before the shower, Sloane informed me that she'd need me to stay inside during the event because my presence would disrupt the intimate atmosphere she was trying to create for her closest friends and family members. She explained that having the homeowner hanging around would make her guests feel awkward and constrained, like they were visiting someone else's house rather than attending her special celebration in a beautiful outdoor venue. I pointed out that it was, in fact, someone else's house, specifically my house, and that being asked to hide inside my own home while she entertained guests in my backyard seemed unreasonable and frankly insulting. Sloane immediately shifted into victim mode, crying about how stressed she was about wedding planning, how overwhelmed she felt by all the details she had to manage, how much it hurt that I was being difficult about something so simple when she'd thought she could count on my support. She suggested that I could use the shower day as an opportunity to run errands, visit friends, or treat myself to a spa day. Anything that would give her and her guests the privacy they needed to fully enjoy the celebration without feeling like they were imposing on my generosity. The manipulation was so obvious and offensive that I almost canceled the whole event right then, but I knew that backing out 2 weeks before the shower would create massive family drama that would probably damage my relationship with Holden permanently. Sloane had trapped me in a situation where refusing her demands would make me look petty and vindictive, while agreeing to them would set a precedent for future boundary violations and disrespectful treatment. But Sloane had made a critical error in assuming that her comfort and preferences were more important than basic respect for the person whose property she was using, and yesterday morning, when she arrived early to oversee the setup and reminded me that I needed to make myself scarce for the day, I realized it was time to teach her a lesson about the consequences of taking advantage of other people's generosity while treating them like inconvenient obstacles to her perfect vision. The afternoon of Sloane's bridal shower dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for an outdoor celebration that I'd supposedly been banned from attending on my own property. I watched from my kitchen window as the party planner and her team arrived at 8 a.m. to begin transforming my backyard into what Sloane had described as her dream venue, complete with elegant table settings, floral arrangements, and enough pink and gold decorations to stock a small wedding boutique. Sloane arrived around 9 a.m. wearing a flowing white dress that was clearly meant to photograph beautifully against my garden backdrop, directing the setup with the kind of authoritative confidence that comes from believing you're entitled to control every detail of your environment. She moved through my yard like she owned it, repositioning furniture, adjusting decorations, and making last-minute changes to the layout without any consideration for the fact that these were permanent alterations to someone else's carefully maintained outdoor space. At 9:30, she knocked on my back door with a bright smile and reminded me that I should probably start getting ready to leave for the day, since her guests would begin arriving around 11 a.m., and she wanted everything to feel perfectly intimate and private. Her tone was cheerful and casual, like she was doing me a favor by giving me advance notice of my eviction from my own backyard, like this arrangement was something we'd mutually agreed upon rather than something she'd demanded and manipulated me into accepting. I told her that I'd actually decided to stay home for the day, that I had some indoor projects to catch up on, and preferred not to disrupt my weekend schedule for her party planning preferences. Her smile faltered slightly as she processed the fact that I wasn't automatically complying with her request to disappear, but she quickly recovered and explained that having me around would really interfere with the atmosphere she was trying to create for her closest friends. When I suggested that her guests were welcome to pretend I didn't exist while they enjoyed my backyard, Sloane's mask slipped completely, and she told me that I was being selfish and inconsiderate, that I was ruining her special day because I couldn't handle giving her a few hours of privacy in a space I'd already agreed to let her use. She said that most people would be happy to accommodate such a simple request from someone who was about to become family, that my stubbornness was making her wonder whether I actually wanted her to marry my brother. The emotional blackmail was predictable, but no less annoying for being expected. Sloane had this way of turning every conflict into a referendum on whether people supported her relationship with Holden, as if disagreeing with her demands meant you were opposed to their happiness rather than simply refusing to be manipulated by someone with an inflated sense of entitlement. Around 10:45, I made a small adjustment to my sprinkler system's timer, changing the schedule so that the zones covering my back lawn and garden beds would activate at 12:15 p.m. instead of their usual 6 a.m. cycle. It was a minor modification that took less than 2 minutes to complete, barely noticeable unless you knew exactly what to look for in the control panel display. The guests began arriving right on schedule at 11 a.m., and I watched from my living room window as 35 women in cocktail dresses and heels navigated my backyard in the kind of impractical footwear that looks elegant in photos but makes walking on grass an adventure in balance and ankle stability. They cooed over the decorations, complimented Sloane on her beautiful venue choice, and settled into their seats for what was clearly intended to be an Instagram-worthy celebration of pre-wedding perfection. The first hour of the party proceeded exactly as Sloane had envisioned, with elegant conversations, delicate finger foods, and enough photo opportunities to document every angle of her carefully curated aesthetic. She held court in the center of the gathering like a princess receiving tribute from her subjects, graciously accepting gifts and compliments while maintaining the kind of serene smile that suggested everything was unfolding precisely according to her vision. But at exactly 12:15 p.m., my sprinkler system activated on its newly adjusted schedule, sending powerful streams of water across the lawn and garden beds where Sloane's guests had arranged themselves in picture-perfect groupings. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. 35 women in expensive outfits shrieking and running for cover as my irrigation system treated them like any other vegetation that needed regular watering to maintain its health and beauty. Sloane herself was caught directly in the spray from the garden bed sprinklers, her flowing white dress becoming transparent as it clung to her body, while she stood frozen in shock at the center of what had been her dream celebration just moments before. Her carefully styled hair collapsed into wet strands framing her face, and her professional makeup began running in streaks down her cheeks as she processed the destruction of her perfect party atmosphere. The chaos was magnificent and immediate. Women were grabbing gift bags and purses while running for the safety of my covered patio, their heels sinking into the suddenly muddy grass as they tried to escape the continuing deluge from my irrigation system. Someone knocked over the gift table in their haste to avoid the sprinklers, sending wrapped packages tumbling across the wet lawn while their ribbons and bows dissolved in the artificial rainstorm. The elegant floral centerpieces were quickly becoming waterlogged disasters, their delicate arrangements collapsing under the weight of unexpected irrigation, while their pink and gold color scheme transformed into a soggy mess of wilted petals and dripping decorations. Through my window, I could see Sloane standing in the middle of the watery chaos, her mouth open in disbelief as she watched months of planning dissolve into absurdity around her. She looked directly at my house with an expression of pure rage, clearly understanding that this irrigation timing was not coincidental, but unable to prove that I'd deliberately sabotaged her celebration. After about 5 minutes, I walked outside with a look of surprised concern and quickly turned off the sprinkler system, apologizing profusely for the malfunction and explaining that my irrigation timer must have been accidentally reset to the wrong schedule. I offered towels to the dripping guests and suggested that we could move the party inside if they wanted to continue their celebration despite the unexpected shower interruption. But the mood was thoroughly broken, and most of the guests were already making excuses about needing to get home to change clothes or check on other commitments. The elegant bridal shower had become a soggy disaster that would be remembered more for its chaotic ending than its sophisticated beginning, and Sloane's dream celebration had transformed into the kind of story that would be retold at family gatherings for years to come. The aftermath of the sprinkler incident was swift and dramatic, with most of Sloane's guests departing within 30 minutes while making polite excuses about other obligations and the unfortunate timing of the system malfunction. I continued playing the role of the apologetic homeowner whose technology had betrayed his generous hospitality, offering additional towels and expressing genuine concern about the disruption to what had clearly been such a beautifully planned celebration. Sloane stood dripping in my garden bed for several minutes after I'd turned off the sprinklers, staring at me with undisguised fury while calculating whether she could prove that my irrigation system's timing hadn't been a coincidence. Her white dress clung to her body transparently, her elaborate hairstyle had collapsed into wet strands, and her carefully applied makeup was running in colorful streams down her face. When most of the guests had departed, Sloane finally found her voice and accused me of deliberately sabotaging her shower because I was jealous of her relationship with Holden and couldn't stand seeing her happy. I maintained my innocent confusion about the irrigation malfunction, expressing sympathy for her disappointment while suggesting that these kinds of technical glitches were unfortunately common with automated sprinkler systems. My performance of baffled helpfulness seemed to frustrate Sloane even more than outright admission of sabotage would have, because she couldn't respond to my fake sympathy with the righteous anger she clearly wanted to express. She was trapped in the same dynamic she'd used to manipulate me into hosting her shower, forced to maintain a facade of graciousness while seething about circumstances that weren't unfolding according to her preferred script. After everyone had left and the cleanup was complete, Sloane confronted me one final time about what she was convinced had been deliberate sabotage of her bridal shower. I told Sloane that I was sorry she felt that way, but that sometimes outdoor events were subject to unexpected complications that couldn't be controlled or predicted. I suggested that maybe this experience would teach her the value of treating people with respect when asking to use their property. The implication was clear enough that Sloane understood I was acknowledging responsibility for the sprinkler incident while maintaining plausible deniability about intentional sabotage. She realized that I'd found a way to respond to her disrespectful treatment without creating the kind of obvious conflict that would make me look like the villain in whatever story she told about our interaction. That evening, Holden called to ask what had happened at the bridal shower, having heard from several guests that the celebration had ended abruptly due to some kind of sprinkler problem. I explained that there had been an unfortunate malfunction with my irrigation system that had surprised everyone, including me, and that I felt terrible about the disruption to what had clearly been such a thoughtfully planned celebration. The conversation was careful and diplomatic, with both of us avoiding direct accusations or admissions while acknowledging that the situation had been unfortunate for everyone involved. Holden seemed relieved that I wasn't angry about Sloane's behavior and that I was taking steps to prevent similar problems in the future. Over the next few days, the story of Sloane's soggy bridal shower spread through our extended family and social circles, with most people expressing sympathy for the bride-to-be who'd been victimized by unfortunate technology timing. But there were also quiet conversations among family members who were familiar with Sloane's demanding personality, subtle suggestions that maybe the sprinkler incident had been karma responding to someone who'd been treating other people's generosity like personal entitlement. The incident had accomplished exactly what I'd hoped it would, demonstrating to Sloane that taking advantage of other people's generosity while treating them disrespectfully could have unexpected consequences, while maintaining enough plausible deniability that I couldn't be accused of deliberate sabotage. She'd learned that trying to ban me from my own backyard while using my property for her celebration was a boundary violation that wouldn't be tolerated. Most importantly, the sprinkler incident had established a new dynamic in my relationship with Sloane, one where she understood that I wouldn't be manipulated or bullied into accepting disrespectful treatment just to avoid family conflict. 2 weeks after the great bridal shower sprinkler incident, the family dynamics around Sloane's wedding planning had shifted in subtle but significant ways that suggested my irrigation lesson had been more effective than I'd initially realized. The most obvious change was in how Sloane approached requests for help or accommodations from family members. Where she'd previously issued demands disguised as emotional appeals, she now made actual requests that acknowledged other people's autonomy and included gracious acceptance of potential refusal. Holden seemed relieved by this evolution in his fiancée's behavior, though he was careful not to comment directly on the difference between her pre-sprinkler and post-sprinkler interactions with family members. Sloane herself maintained polite but distant interactions with me at family gatherings, clearly still suspicious about whether the sprinkler timing had been truly accidental but unable to prove deliberate sabotage without seeming paranoid and vindictive. 3 weeks after the shower, Sloane called to ask if I'd be willing to help with some electrical work at the reception venue, but her approach was completely different from her previous demands. She explained the situation, acknowledged that it was a significant request that would require my expertise and time, offered to pay for materials and labor, and emphasized that she would understand completely if I preferred not to take on the project. I agreed to help with the electrical work, partly because the request had been made respectfully and partly because I wanted to demonstrate that I was willing to support Holden's wedding when asked appropriately rather than being manipulated into compliance. The project went smoothly, with Sloane expressing genuine gratitude for my contribution and making sure I was comfortable with the timeline and scope of work. The change in our dynamic was noticed by other family members who'd been watching the tension between Sloane and me develop over the months of wedding planning. Even the vendors working on Sloane's wedding commented on her improved communication style, with the florist mentioning to my mother that the bride had become much easier to work with after some initial challenges during the early planning stages. The most significant change was in Sloane's relationship with Holden, who seemed less stressed and more enthusiastic about their upcoming marriage as the planning process became more collaborative and less dictatorial. Where he'd previously looked exhausted and overwhelmed by his fiancée's demands and expectations, he now appeared genuinely excited about their wedding and grateful for the family support they were receiving. 6 weeks after the sprinkler incident, Sloane actually thanked me privately for hosting her bridal shower, acknowledging that despite the unfortunate ending with the irrigation malfunction, she'd appreciated having such a beautiful venue for her celebration. Her gratitude seemed genuine rather than performative, suggesting that she'd gained some perspective on the incident and perhaps even recognized that her behavior leading up to the shower had been less than gracious. The wedding itself was beautiful and drama-free, with Sloane graciously accepting help from family members while expressing genuine appreciation for everyone's contributions to their special day. She thanked me publicly during the reception for my electrical work at the venue, crediting my expertise with making their celebration possible and expressing gratitude for having such a skilled and generous brother-in-law. The irrigation incident had accomplished something that months of direct confrontation probably couldn't have achieved. It had demonstrated consequences for disrespectful behavior without creating permanent family conflict or forcing Holden to choose sides between his fiancée and his family. Sloane had learned her lesson about boundaries and respect through experience rather than lecture, which made the education more memorable and effective than any verbal explanation would have been. The sprinkler solution had been perfect because it addressed Sloane's disrespectful treatment while maintaining plausible deniability about intentional retaliation. She'd gotten the message about boundaries and consequences without being able to claim victimhood or turn the incident into evidence of my unreasonable behavior toward her. The sprinkler incident became family legend, referenced with knowing smiles whenever someone told stories about outdoor party planning or wedding drama. But more importantly, it had established a new standard for how Sloane interacted with Holden's family, one based on mutual respect rather than entitled demands disguised as emotional appeals. Sometimes the most effective way to teach someone about respect is to let them experience the natural consequences of disrespectful behavior. And sometimes the best response to manipulation is a demonstration of power that can't be argued with or explained away. My backyard had returned to its normal irrigation schedule, but the lesson it had taught about boundaries and consequences continued to shape family dynamics long after the soggy decorations had been replaced and the damaged egos had healed.